Once upon a time, there was a witch who was famous for casting spells in the form of questions. Thus, she was known as Corrida the Question Witch. One grey, cloudy morning, Corrida woke up from an unrestful sleep and was feeling extremely moody. Therefore, after getting dressed, she glided down the staircase into her drawing room, where there stood a portrait. However, it was no ordinary portrait. "Oh, knowledgeable portrait in the hall, tell me, who's the happiest of them all?" Corrida inquired the portrait, which replied with the utmost solemnity. "Certainly not thee, Corrida. There are plenty out there who are happier than thee." "That I know already." Corrida rolled her eyes, swallowed her anger, and reminded herself that she had to be patient to get anything out of this stingy portrait. "Get to the point, please. Who is it?" "Her name is Gabriella," the portrait replied jubilantly, as he took great pleasure in seeing Corrida angry, especially if it was first thing in the morning. "Who?" Or shall I say, Princess Gabriella. After she was married to the prince 364 days and 5 hours ago. The portrait spoke extremely slowly so as to make the witch even more frustrated. Just when Corrida was about to lose her temper and shout, the person in the portrait disappeared, and in the frame appeared the image of a prince and his bride happily enjoying breakfast in a luxurious dining room. "OMG!" Corrida exclaimed in astonishment. "Isn't this?" Suddenly, Corrida's smartphone rang. As she slid open the lock screen, she discovered that she had a video call. "Hello, Auntie Corrida. I hope I haven't waken you up from your dreams. I'm just calling to see if you're still in one piece, just making sure that you haven't turned yourself into a frog or something." In fact, it was her niece, Cindy, calling her. "I see that you are still as rude as before, just like your mother was," Corrida replied. "I was very well until you called. For your information, in fact, I have just received intelligence from that annoying portrait that your stepsister Gabriella was married to the prince, wasn't she? And she is now living a life of bliss and luxury, whilst you're stuck with that appalling stepmother of yours." "Oh, come on, Auntie Corrida. Don't even mention that detestable name of hers." Cindy's eyes flashed angrily and started screaming frantically. "I was supposed to marry the prince. I was the one that danced with him at the night of the grand ball, and I was the one that left that beautiful shoe with him so he could find me. Nevertheless, he suddenly changed his schedule and visited our house earlier than expected, so I was completely taken by surprise and didn't have time to put my makeup on. Oh, curse that wicked stepmother of mine, who knew about the change in schedule from the prince's Facebook page and deliberately concealed it from me. And curse that atrocious Gabriella, who was naturally beautiful and seduced the prince, despite the fact that she was not the one the prince was looking for all along. Oh, who told you to be such a fool then?" Corrida cut in curtly. "Just like your mother, who married the father of yours who did not even know how to perform magic. And she gave up her magical powers for him. If it wasn't for her act of foolishness, you could have become a witch, and an evil one too. But it is not entirely irreversible. Maybe I can help you a bit here." Meanwhile, in the palace, Gabriella was standing by the bedside of her husband. "Henry, please still wake up. It's nearly 10 in the morning and everyone's waiting for you to eat breakfast." "Oh, shut up, you ignorant woman. How many times have I told you not to talk to me in the morning? And who has given you permission to call me by my Christian name? You have no right. Call me your highness." The prince snapped before covering his face with the blanket, having no intention at all to wake up, and growled, "Get lost." As Gabriella descended the staircase after quitting the bedchamber, she accidentally overheard the conversation between Charlotte and Caroline, the two sisters of Prince Henry. "I've heard that her mother was a widow who remarried to a wealthy merchant, who also died after several years. Caroline, the elder of the two, whispered loudly in the hallway. Indeed, what if her entire family was cursed? Oh, Caroline, I don't want to die yet. Charlotte suddenly broke into a violent fit of sobbing, which was immediately stopped by her sister's insult. Oh, will you quit crying? You look very much like a pig when you cry. Plus, Gabriella sure is excessively plain, Caroline continued mercifully. And without any sense of fashion whatsoever, Charlotte added disdainfully. I really don't understand Henry's taste for women sometimes, Caroline replied. The last girl was as thin as a stick, and this one, as rusty as a country girl. Speaking of which, she is here, Charlotte said as she glared at the poor Gabriella, who stood stone still, flabbergasted by the criticisms on the staircase. I beg your pardon for overhearing your conversation. It was entirely an accident, Gabriella apologized sincerely. Pray, do not assume that we care at all if you've heard them. We have absolutely no intention of concealing our feelings from you in the very first place. Caroline, whose embarrassment turned into anger, continued. Being the wife of the prince and the future queen of our empire, it is your duty to make yourself useful in this palace. Go to the kitchen and help the servants prepare luncheon. Oh, and don't forget to change before you get my pretty dress dirty. As Gabriella walked away towards the direction of the kitchen, Charlotte giggled. Look at her awkward posture, sister. I wonder how long our empire would last in her hands after she becomes queen. Caroline nodded in approval and replied, But it would be of no difference to us anyway, as we would have long been married to handsome princes by then. As Gabriella entered the kitchen, Sandy, the kitchen maid, having perceived her entrance, said sarcastically, I see that it has taken you quite a while getting dressed, Princess Gabriella. As you can see, we are well underway in preparation for luncheon. It is just as well that you have arrived at this moment in time. I have some dishes for you to wash. After Sandy has indicated to poor Gabriella the location where the dirty, greasy dishes were placed, the latter lifted the cumbersome container up and walked slowly towards the sink. Make haste, make haste. We don't have all day, you know, and mind those dishes. They're the favorites of the queen. Sandy scolded Gabriella for her clumsiness for seemingly the 100th time that day. After Gabriella has finished with the disgusting dishes, without receiving any sort of break whatsoever, she was immediately ordered to clean the oven, a job hated by everyone in the kitchen. Thus, it was always Gabriella's turn to do it. It wasn't of no cause that the job of cleaning the oven was despised by everyone, as it was always resulted in the cleaner not only getting gruesome grease over her hands and clothes, but also the dying ashes smothers the face of the cleaner so it's as black as coal. This was the life of Gabriella, the beloved pearl of her mother, for the past 364 days after her marriage to the prince, but of which, due to Gabriella's fear of making her mother anxious, the poor girl never replied to her mother in their video call conversations. That evening, Gabriella eventually had time to rest on the sofa of the drawing room. Just as she sat down, the Queen and her daughters arrived at the drawing room after their dinner. Suddenly, Charlotte and Caroline began to giggle violently. The confused Gabriella had no idea what was going on. After some time, it was Charlotte, still giggling, who broke the suspense. Mama, look at her face. It's black with cinder. Is this some sort of cosmetics of the latest technology? Smothering your face with cinder? No! Enough of your tricks, Gabriella, the Queen suddenly shouted, which silenced everyone. Go and clean your dirty face, then come back and play a song for us on the piano. For indeed, what other use are you except to play on the piano to amuse us? As neither Caroline nor Charlotte knew how to play the piano, they were both extremely jealous of the talented Gabriella. as Gabriella rose from the couch and walked to the bathroom to clean her face, which was smothered by cinders after cleaning the oven that morning. Charlotte said to her mother, "Mama, let's not call her Gabriella anymore. We should call her Cinderella instead, as her face is always smothered by cinder." And what's more, Gabriella heard the booming laugh of Prince Henry as she turned the corner. After Gabriella and Prince Henry finally returned to their bedroom that evening, Gabriella could eventually stand it no more. She kneeled by the bed and started sobbing. The prince, who was sitting on an armchair reading the newspaper, paid absolutely no heed to the tender feelings of her wife and continued to read as if nothing has happened. After 10 minutes, Prince Henry suddenly bellowed. Without getting out of her chair or putting down the newspaper, he said, "Oh, will you shut up and quit crying, you ignorant woman? Can't you see that I'm trying to read the newspaper here? If you want to cry, go to the toilet and close the door. Even if you cry all night, I won't pay the least attention to you." "But, Your Highness," Gabriella sobbed, "didn't you see how your sisters and your mother bullied me in the drawing room? I'm not a clown. I'm not here to amuse you. If you can't do anything, can't you at least come over and soothe me?" "Well, what they said were absolutely true. You did have cinder on your face, and what can you do except play the piano? You don't even know how to dance," Prince Henry scolded coldly. "And, by the way, I'm sure Mother knows best. I find no fault in her speech. Now will you shut up?" That night, Gabriella lay awake on her bed, thinking about her dear Mama and her life before she was married to the prince. Then she remembered Cindy, her stepsister, who could be a bit nasty and mischievous at times, but were in her mind 1,000 times kinder than the two sisters of the prince. "Oh, how I wish I hadn't listened to Mama and married the prince. The prince doesn't even love me. Whom he loves is actually Cindy, who danced with him at the night of the ball," she thought as she eventually dozed off. On the other hand, as for the mischievous Cindy, she immediately arrived at her Auntie Carida's house after the latter has promised to help her in their video call conversation. Well, let's see who's here. Very active, or shall I say, too active, just like your mother," Carida commented as she saw her niece by her doorstep. But as I'm always good with my word, I will help you. But you must promise me something in return." What was malicious Carida secretly planning in her foolish little head? "Follow me," Carida said as she beckoned Cindy to follow her up the stairs and up into her own private study. Then the former walked towards the fireplace and pointed to two ancient grandfather clocks next to it. "So, what am I supposed to be looking at? Two broken pieces of trash that should have been thrown away 2 centuries ago?" Cindy inquired with her eyebrows raised. "Do not regard these clocks with scorn," Carida snapped. "They are in fact the clock to time travel. They can reverse time, so you will be the one married to the prince instead of your stepsister." "Oh my God!" Cindy exclaimed in astonishment. "Do not interrupt! How rude!" Carida shouted. "Where was I? Oh yes, but you have to promise me something in return, as I mentioned earlier. Before your mother, my poor dear sister, died, she asked me to make sure that you are married to a wealthy family. Therefore, it is my duty as your aunt, and as well as your witch godmother, to fulfill it. After you are married to the prince, my mission will be accomplished. Then I'll move to Paris to live my happy life. But remember, as time travel is only limited to once in every lifetime, you cannot regret your decision. And even if you do, you will have to live with it. I won't be able to help you. Will you promise me that?" Yeah, of course, whatever," the impatient Cindy replied hastily without even listening to Carida's rant. "Just tell me what I have to do, okay? Then you can go and enjoy your life anywhere. Even if you're going to the moon, I won't care a bit. Just do it now, please." Fine, a deal is made, Carita said, almost with a sense of relief. Now, turn the handle of the clock closer to you in the clockwise direction, and I will turn the one next to me anti-clockwise. Mind, keep the same pace as me. Don't go any faster or slower, and when I stop, you shall stop too. Could you take us back to the night of the grand ball, so I can dance with the prince again? Cindy asked. No, we'll return to the day when the prince arrived at your house with your sister's shoe, Carita answered. But don't worry, you have plenty of opportunities of dancing with the prince after you are married. Trust me. No, but... Before Cindy could finish her sentence, Carita had already placed her finger on the handle of the clock closest to her. Then after counting to 3, the two started to perform their magic. As Carita was turning the handle of the clock closer to her, she began to chant, Fee, fee, fo, fun, take us back to where it all begun. Without warning, Cindy felt a sudden feeling of dizziness, so she was forced to close her eyes. Cindy has returned to the morning after the grand ball. Gabriella and her mother were in the living room, chatting about the ball of the previous evening, when Gabriella's stepmother suddenly said, I wonder what that Cindy is up to. It's nearly noon and she is still in her bedroom. She was always an early bird instead of a late riser. She must be up to some mischief again. Just when she rose from the sofa to go and knock on Cindy's door, the doorbell rang from downstairs. It must be the prince, she exclaimed as she quickly dashed downstairs to answer the door. And it was the prince indeed, with the royal footman behind him holding a tray containing a gorgeous shoe, Gabriella's shoe. Will Cindy succeed this time and become the prince's bride instead of her stepsister? Just when the oblivious Gabriella, after perceiving the footman to be holding her shoe, was about to exclaim in astonishment, when suddenly someone walked out of Cindy's room wearing Cindy's clothes but was far prettier than Cindy. No, wait, she looked exactly like the mysterious lady who danced with the prince the entire time and fled abruptly during the grand ball of the previous evening. In fact, it was just Cindy standing in front of them, but her makeup skills were so talented that one could hardly recognize this fairy-like lady to be her ugly old self. After Cindy has appeared, the prince immediately recognized her to be the mysterious lady of the previous evening and could not take his eyes off her. After curtsying to the prince, it was the cunning Cindy who broke the silence. It is a great pleasure of meeting you again, Your Highness. I'm very much obliged to you for hosting the grand ball of the previous night. It has been the most wonderful night I, a poor orphan, have passed since the death of my beloved parents. Cindy got to this part. She quickly pulled out a handkerchief to wipe her eyes, which were in reality quite dry. The prince immediately went forward and held both hands of Cindy firmly in his and exclaimed, "Oh, my lady, I finally found you. Did you know how much pain I have suffered last night in my restless sleep after your sudden quittance of the ball? So simply could not imagine what my life would become without you. Will you please do me the honor to dance with me again?" "But, Your Highness, what about the shoe?" the footman exclaimed, whose question the prince completely ignored. To everyone's amazement, Cindy and the prince began to dance majestically in the hallway. Meanwhile, Cindy's stepmother was made completely speechless by shock. 1,000 questions filled her mind. How did Cindy know that the prince has changed his schedule when she deliberately concealed it from her? How could Cindy transform her appearance so much solely by makeup? Why is the prince so charmed by her? Where did she learn to dance so well? After the dancing has finished, the suspicious prince finally confirmed that the girl standing in front of him was definitely the mysterious lady of last night. So he immediately kneeled down and proposed to her. "Will you marry me, my love?" To which Cindy slightly nodded with a small blush on her face. Go and put on the gown you wore last night, and let us return to the palace to announce this fantastic news to my dear mamma," the prince said to Cindy. Without warning, Cindy began to cry. Her little sobs and big drops of tears were so touching and different to her usual howls that it would be able to make anyone pity her. "I beg your pardon, your highness," Cindy said with sobs in between her words. "But I'm afraid that it's entirely out of my power to put on that gown ever again." Only after the prince's insisting demand did Cindy begin to speak reluctantly, while throwing timid glances at her stepmother and stepsister. Because my stepmother and my stepsister, they burned that gown after discovering that I had secretly went to the ball without their permission." Then Cindy broke into another fit of fake sobbing. The outraged prince immediately pointed at Cindy's stepmother and stepsister and bellowed deafeningly, "How dare you do such a thing to a poor orphan, even after I explicitly invited every unmarried girl in the kingdom to attend the ball? You have chosen to prevent her from going. As punishment for going against the words of the prince, you two are banished from this kingdom forever. I don't want to see your revolting faces ever again." However hard the stepmother tried to tell the prince the truth, the latter, who was blinded by love, would hear nothing of it and left the house with Cindy in the carriage to return to the royal palace in preparation for the wedding. On the following morning, Gabriella and her mother, who were banished from their country by Prince Henry, arrived at the train station with minimal luggage and boarded the earliest train of the day to Paris, where they have decided to start over a new life. As for the house where they previously lived in, Gabriella's mother left it with all the furniture to Cindy, since it was originally the property of Cindy's deceased father anyway. Phew! At least we've finally gotten rid of Cindy and will never have the obligation to see her ever again, Cindy's stepmother quietly thought to herself on their way to their new home. After their arrival in Paris, Gabriella met a wealthy French merchant, an old acquaintance of hers whom she met during the grand ball hosted by Prince Henry. The two fell in love at second sight and were soon married before the second semester of the year was quite over. The merchant, unlike Prince Henry, had a mild temper, a special taste to music and literature, and most importantly of all, he wholeheartedly loved Gabriella. The couple lived happily ever after. Wait a minute, how about Cindy? You would ask. Cindy, after her marriage to Prince Henry, led a life of luxury in the royal palace, devoting all her leisure time in dancing with the prince in the grand hall, and had thus got quite fed up with the activity despite it being her favorite hobby before her marriage. The Queen, Charlotte and Caroline, whom Cindy seized hold of any opportunity to appease, pronounced Cindy to be the most affectionate, tender, and intelligent girl they've ever met, so they hadn't even thought about ordering Cindy to the kitchen, which her poor stepsister had suffered before time has been reversed. There was only one little secret which Cindy had kept from her dear Prince Henry, and that was she dared not show herself without her makeup in his presence. Every morning, she woke up early to put on makeup and wig before her husband woke, and every evening Cindy waited until Prince Henry was sound asleep before she dared to remove her makeup and blonde wig. Well, one could still argue that Cindy also lived happily ever after, just that it's in her own different way. The end.